In just 43 seconds, one of the most anticipated talk show appearances of the year completely fell apart. What was supposed to be a friendly chat turned into an absolute explosion of accusations, raised voices, and a guest being escorted off the stage. This is what really went down last night. The studio lights were bright and hot when Meghan Markle walked onto the set of the Tamron Hall show. The audience clapped and cheered as she took her seat across from Tamron, flashing that famous smile everyone knows. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit and sat down carefully, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap like she was ready for a calm, easy conversation. Tamron welcomed her with a warm smile and thanked her for coming on the show. The first few minutes seemed perfectly normal. They talked about Meghan's recent projects and her life in California. Meghan spoke softly and carefully, choosing each word like she was reading from a script she'd practiced 100 times. The audience listened quietly, and everything felt smooth and polished. But Tamron Hall isn't known for keeping things surface level. She's built her career on asking the questions other hosts are too scared to ask, and everyone in that studio knew it was only a matter of time before she went deeper. And when she did, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted like someone had flipped a switch. "Let's talk about your family," Tamron said, leaning forward slightly with her hands clasped together. "Because I think a lot of people watching at home feel confused. You've spoken about wanting privacy, but you've also done multiple interviews, a Netflix series, a book. Help us understand where the line is for you." Meghan's smile got a little tighter. You could see her jaw clench just a bit, like she was biting down on something bitter. She took a breath and said, "Well, Tamron, there's a difference between telling your own story and having lies told about you." "Sure," Tamron nodded. "But some people say that you're the one controlling the narrative, that you share what helps you and leave out what doesn't. Is that fair?" The audience got really quiet. You could hear someone cough in the back row. Meghan shifted in her seat and her voice got a little sharper. "I think that's incredibly unfair. We've been attacked, lied about, and had our characters destroyed by the press. We have every right to defend ourselves." Tamron didn't back down. She kept her eyes locked on Meghan's face and said, "But your father, for example. He's given interviews saying he feels shut out, that he hasn't met his grandchildren. Do you think you share any responsibility for that relationship breaking down?" That was the moment everything changed. Meghan's whole body went stiff. Her face flushed red and her eyes got hard and cold. "My father," she said slowly, each word sharp like a knife, "sold stories about me to tabloids before my wedding. He staged fake photos. He betrayed me in the worst possible way. So, no, I don't think I owe him anything." The audience made a little gasping sound, like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Tamron held up her hand and said, "I hear you, but he's still your father. He's an old man now. Don't you think there could be some kind of reconciliation?" Meghan actually laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was cold and bitter. "Reconciliation? Are you serious right now? Would you reconcile with someone who made money off humiliating you on your wedding day?" Tamron's expression changed. Her friendly smile disappeared, and her voice got harder. "I'm not here to tell you what to do with your family, Meghan. I'm asking questions that a lot of people want answers to. That's my job." "Your job?" Meghan shot back. Her voice was getting louder now. "Your job is to sit here and judge me? To make me look like the bad guy while everyone else gets away with treating me like garbage?" The studio got so tense you could feel it in the air. Tamron sat up straighter and said firmly, "Nobody's judging you. But you came on this show knowing we were going to have a real conversation. If you only want to talk about the things that make you look good, maybe this wasn't the right place to come." Meghan's mouth fell open. She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe Tamron had just said that to her. For a second, she didn't say anything at all. Then she found her voice again and it came out shaking with anger. "Wow," she said. "So this is what this is. This is an ambush. You invited me here just to tear me down like everyone else does." Tamron shook her head. "This isn't an ambush. These are fair questions. Millions of people have these same questions. You can't expect everyone to just accept your version of events without asking for details." "My version?" Meghan's voice cracked. "My version is the truth. Everything I've said is the truth." "Then help us understand it," Tamron said, spreading her hands out. "Walk us through it." Explain why your relationship with your father is beyond repair. Explain why you cut off so many family members. Give us something real instead of just playing the victim." The words, "playing the victim," hit like a bomb. Meghan stood up so fast her chair almost fell over backward. Her face was red now, really red, and her hands were shaking. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you sit there and say I'm playing the victim when you have no idea what I've been through?" The audience was completely frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. All eyes were locked on the two women facing each other like they were about to have a fistfight. Tamron stood up too, but she was calmer. Her voice was steady and strong. "I know you've been through a lot. Nobody's denying that. But you're not the only person who's ever suffered. And when you go on television and tell your story, people are going to have questions. That's how this works." "Questions?" Meghan spat the word out. "These aren't questions. This is an attack. You're trying to make me look bad because that's what gets views. Right? That's what makes good television?" Tamron's eyes flashed. "If you think I'm attacking you, then you're not listening. I've asked you straightforward questions that anyone watching would want to know. If you can't handle that, then maybe you're not ready to be in the public eye." That line pushed Meghan over the edge completely. She grabbed her purse from beside her chair and swung it over her shoulder. "This is bullshit," she said loudly, and the curse word echoed through the silent studio. "This whole thing is bullshit. You invited me here under false pretenses. Nobody lied to you," Tamron fired back. Her voice was getting louder too now. "You knew this was going to be a real interview. You knew I wasn't going to just sit here and let you say whatever you wanted without any pushback." "Pushback?" Meghan was breathing hard, like she'd been running. "You've done nothing but attack me since I sat down. You and everyone else in the media just can't stand that I stood up for myself. You can't stand that I walked away from a toxic situation." Tamron took a step closer. "What I can't stand is someone who claims they want privacy but won't stop talking. Someone who says they want to move on but keeps bringing up the past. Someone who paints themselves as a hero while throwing everyone around them under the bus." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Some people in the crowd looked shocked. Others looked like they agreed with Tamron. The room was split right down the middle. Meghan's hands were clenched into fists. "You know what?" she said, her voice shaking. "I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with people like you who pretend to care but really just want to tear me down for ratings." "Then go," Tamron said coldly. "If you can't handle honest questions, then leave. But don't act surprised when people keep asking them, because you're the one who keeps putting yourself out there." Meghan turned toward the exit, but then she spun back around. Her eyes were blazing. "You want to know why I keep speaking out? Because if I don't, people like you control the story. People like you twist everything I say and make me into a villain. So yeah, I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to keep defending myself, and there's nothing you can do about it." Tamron crossed her arms over her chest. "Great. Keep talking. But don't expect everyone to just nod along and believe everything you say without question. That's not how the real world works." "The real world?" Meghan laughed that bitter laugh again. "You think this is the real world? Sitting in your comfortable studio, asking nasty questions while pretending to be fair? You have no idea what the real world is like for me." "Then enlighten us," Tamron challenged. "Sit back down and explain it. Give us real answers instead of just getting angry and running away." Meghan stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched out painfully. Then she shook her head slowly. "No, I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected. I came here thinking this would be different. I thought you, of all people, would understand. But you're just like the rest of them." I understand plenty," Tamron said quietly. "I understand that you want everyone to see things your way without having to answer hard questions. I understand that you want sympathy without accountability. But that's not how interviews work, Meghan. Not on my show." Meghan's lip curled. "Your show? Right. Well, enjoy your show, Tamron. Enjoy tearing people down and calling it journalism. I'm sure it makes you feel really powerful." Tamron's expression didn't change. "This isn't about power. It's about truth. And if you can't handle someone asking for the truth, then yeah, maybe you should go." That was it. That was the final straw. Meghan turned on her heel and started walking toward the exit. Her heels clicked loudly on the studio floor. Every step echoed in the dead quiet room. The audience watched her go with their mouths hanging open, but she wasn't quite done yet. Right before she reached the exit, she turned around one more time. Her voice carried across the entire studio. You know what the saddest part is? I actually respected you, Tamron. I thought you were different. But you're just another person willing to throw me under the bus for a headline. Congratulations, you got your moment. Tamron didn't flinch. She stood there on the stage, calm and composed, and said, the only person making headlines here is you. The only person causing drama is you. I asked questions. You couldn't handle them. That says everything. Meghan's face twisted with anger. Damn you, she said, her voice breaking. Damn you and this whole thing. I never should have come here. Well, we can agree on that, Tamron replied coolly. Meghan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she pushed through the exit door. It slammed shut behind her with a bang that made everyone in the studio jump. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was thick and heavy. Then Tamron turned back to face the audience. She took a deep breath and smoothed down her jacket. Her face was serious but calm. Well, she said, that was something. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. A few people started clapping nervously, but it died out quickly. Tamron held up her hand. Look, she said, I know that was intense. And I know some of you might think I was too hard on her. But here's the thing. When someone comes on this show, I'm going to ask real questions. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect when it's not. I'm not going to nod and smile and let people say whatever they want without any follow-up. She paused and looked directly into the camera. Meghan Markle has been through a lot. Nobody's denying that. But she's also made choices. She's told her story in multiple forums, making serious accusations about people and institutions. And when those stories raise questions, it's my job to ask them. That's what journalism is. That's what honest conversation looks like. The audience was still quiet, processing everything they'd just witnessed. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked like they wanted to cheer. The energy in the room was strange and unsettled. Tamron walked closer to the edge of the stage. You can't have it both ways, she continued. You can't demand privacy while doing interview after interview. You can't ask for compassion while refusing to show it to your own family members. You can't claim you want to move forward while constantly looking backward. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices and your own words. She let that sink in for a moment. Then she shook her head. What you just saw wasn't an ambush. It wasn't an attack. It was what happens when someone who's used to controlling the narrative runs into questions they don't like. And instead of engaging, instead of explaining, instead of having a real conversation, she ran. She got angry and she left. Tamron walked back to her chair and sat down heavily. She looked tired suddenly, like the confrontation had drained all her energy. I wanted to have a good conversation with her. I really did. I wanted to understand her perspective better. I wanted to give her a chance to address the things people are confused about. But you can't have that conversation if one person isn't willing to be honest. The studio stayed quiet. A camera operator coughed. Someone in the crew area dropped something that made a clattering sound. But mostly, there was just silence and shock. So here we are, Tamron said, spreading her hands. We had a guest who couldn't handle tough questions, who got defensive and angry and stormed out. And honestly, that tells you everything you need to know. If you're telling the truth, if your story is solid, if you really believe in what you're saying, then you should be able to defend it. You should be able to answer questions about it. You shouldn't have to run away. She looked into the camera again with a serious expression. I respect people who've been through trauma. I respect people who've had hard lives. But I also respect the truth. And I respect my audience enough to ask the questions they want answered, instead of just giving someone a platform to say whatever they want without any accountability. The audience finally started clapping. Slowly at first. Then louder. Some people stood up. Others stayed seated. The room was clearly divided, but the applause grew until it filled the studio. Tamron nodded her thanks but didn't smile. She looked drained and serious. We're going to take a break, she announced. When we come back, we'll have a different guest. Someone who I hope will be willing to actually have a conversation. The lights dimmed for the commercial break, and the audience started talking among themselves in hushed, excited voices. People were pulling out their phones, already texting and posting about what they'd just witnessed. The producers were scrambling backstage, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of the show. Nobody could quite believe what had just happened. One of the most famous women in the world had just stormed off a talk show in front of millions of viewers. She'd cursed, she'd yelled, she'd accused the host of attacking her, and she'd left without answering a single hard question. The clip would be everywhere within minutes. Social media would explode. News outlets would cover it for days. Everyone would have an opinion about who was right and who was wrong. But in that moment, in that studio, everyone who'd witnessed it firsthand knew one thing for certain. They'd just watched something extraordinary. They'd watched a confrontation that would be talked about for years. They'd watched two strong women clash in the most dramatic way possible. And they'd watched one of them refuse to back down from asking the questions that needed to be asked, while the other couldn't handle the heat and walked away. The exit door where Meghan had disappeared stayed closed. She was gone. She wasn't coming back. Her microphone pack had been left behind on her chair, forgotten in her rush to leave. It sat there like evidence of what had just gone down. Tamron sat in her chair, taking deep breaths and preparing for the rest of the show. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were troubled. She knew this would follow her for a long time. She knew people would criticize her for being too tough, but she also knew she'd done her job. She'd asked the questions. She'd pushed for real answers. She hadn't let someone use her show as just another publicity stop where they could say whatever they wanted without challenge. The commercial break was almost over. The lights came back up. Tamron straightened her shoulders and put on a professional smile. The show had to go on, even after something this explosive, even after a guest had cursed on live television and stormed out in fury. But everyone there knew this was the moment they'd remember. This was the interview that would define both women in different ways. For Tamron, it would show that she wasn't afraid to ask hard questions no matter who was sitting across from her. For Meghan, it would raise even more questions about whether she could handle scrutiny, whether her story held up under pressure, whether she was willing to engage honestly, or just wanted people to accept her version without question. The cameras came back on. Tamron welcomed everyone back and introduced her next guest. A completely different topic, a totally different energy. But the ghost of what had just happened hung over the rest of the show. The audience couldn't quite focus. The crew kept whispering to each other. And Tamron, though professional and composed, seemed distracted, because something had happened on that stage that nobody would forget. A line had been crossed. A confrontation had exploded. And one of the most anticipated interviews of the year had ended with a dramatic walkout that would be replayed and analyzed and debated for a very long time. The show ended eventually. The audience filed out, still buzzing with excitement and disbelief. The crew started breaking down the set. And somewhere out in the parking lot, Meghan Markle was probably sitting in her car, furious and shaken, calling her lawyers and her publicists and her husband, trying to figure out how to respond to what had just happened. But back in that studio, Tamron Hall stood alone on the stage for a moment after everyone else had left. She looked at the empty chair where Meghan had been sitting. She thought about all the questions that hadn't been answered, all the explanations that hadn't come, all the defensiveness and anger instead of honesty and clarity. And she knew that she'd done what she had to do. She'd asked the questions. She'd pushed for truth. And if that meant someone walked out angry and accusing her of being unfair, then so be it. Because that was the job. That was what real journalism looked like. That was what happened when someone decided they weren't going to just accept whatever story they were being told. The lights went dark. The studio emptied. But the impact of what had happened there would echo for a very long time.